Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. Hi, good afternoon. We're going to get started right now. So I'm so glad that all of you all are here and that you're just as excited as I am for this presentation that we're going to have. So I'm Rosanna Goss. I co-chair the CARE Committee, along with Kristen Byers. We're both the co-chairs of CARE. And this colloquium, is brought to you by CARE and the Office of Inclusion and Diversity. I love that we call our council CARE because I think all of us care very deeply about the school, as well as topics like this that we're going to present today and bringing this colloquium to SOM. So CARE is a group of alumni, staff, faculty, and students that work together to bring the issues and needs of the community to the dean, and we advise the dean as well. And so we've been doing this for the past 3 years, and the colloquium, the Don Ogilvie Colloquium, is one of the programs that we've instituted here. And it's in honor of an alum from the first class, one of the Black alums from the first class, who was the embodiment of SOM as well as Yale, and we do this in his honor every year. And so this year, we have 2 alums with us, and then we also have Camilla, who is going to moderate the discussion. And so I'm going to introduce Camilla, and then she will introduce the moderators to all of you. So Camilla Novo Viano is a first-year MBA student at the Yale School of Management. Before coming to Yale, she spent 5 years at FSG, a social impact focused consulting firm where she advised corporations and foundations on their charitable giving and shared value strategies. Much of her work at FSG was focused on corporations and advancing racial equity and economic mobility. Camilla is the first-year leader of the Students for Racial Equity and the American Latin Business Association and a consortium fellow. She's involved in nonprofit board fellows and the Mang Impact Investing Fund. She'll be co-chairing the 2025 Yale Philanthropy Conference, and she holds a BA in Public and International Affairs from Princeton University. So, Camilla, come on up and get us started.
Hi. Can people hear me? I am suddenly losing my voice, which is unfortunate timing. So hope the mic is strong. But thank you all so much for coming. Welcome back to New Haven, for those of you who are here for your reunion. Very exciting to have you back. And I'm so excited to introduce our panelists for today, who I've had a chance to get to know a little bit yesterday and today, and it has been delightful. So first, we have Mark Walton, who is an associate professor of the Professional Practice in Media Management at the New School in New York City. He also regularly consults with media companies, government entities, and independent content creators to help them develop business models and seek distribution for their works. Most recently, Mark was president of sales and marketing for One Caribbean Television. Prior to that, he was a member of the senior management team that launched the Africa Channel in the US and in the UK. Mark co-founded the TV syndication company Onks Media Group and secured distribution and sponsorship for over 50 shows, including New York Undercover and the Hispanic Heritage Awards. He was also a founding partner at the independent film distribution company KJM3 Entertainment, which marketed Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust and Raoul Peck's The Man by the Shore. Mark began his career at the CBS television network in marketing. He earned his BS in journalism from Boston University's College of Communications, where he sits on the Dean's Advisory Board, and he holds a master's from the Yale School of Management. He was recently the co-chair of the school's Council on Anti-Racism and Equity. We also have Anna Blanding, class of 09. She's a chief investment officer who is passionate about transformative capital and uses her background in private capital markets, endowment management, state and federal policy, and philanthropy to create equitable communities as well as access for diverse fund managers. She is a national leader in impact investment and has numerous presentations and publications, including 2 Yale School of Management case studies on her work. Currently, Anna is Chief Investment Officer at Concorp, a Connecticut-based impact enterprise whose mission is to drive economic development in impoverished communities through investment in commercial and real estate, as well as minority-owned businesses, to transform communities and close the racial wealth gap. You can see her work here in New Haven. She leads Concorp's signature development called Concat Place on Dixwell, which is a sustainable $225 million mixed-use real estate development located in the heart of the historic African-American community that is quickly becoming a national model. The development, a place-based impact investment, will bring housing, adult workforce training, fresh food and grocery, a food hall, office space, business incubation, a performing arts center, quality affordable daycare, health and mental health, and job training to the Dixwell community. It's a lot. Yeah, so exciting. And it serves as an example of restorative community development. In her capacity as Chief Investment Officer, Anna also oversees the Economic Justice Fund for Women and BIPOC entrepreneurs, as well as the organization's Qualified Opportunity Zone Fund. Prior to Concorp, Anna was Deputy CIO at Choate Rosemary Hall, where she saw a $350 million endowment and deployed capital access across all private and public asset classes. Prior to Choate, Anna was an investment officer at the Annie Casey Foundation, a $4 billion endowment where she focused on the $2 billion private capital portfolio and made allocations in venture, private equity, private debt, and real estate and real assets. Currently, Anna is a trustee of the board of Yale University Dwight Hall, Yale's public interest umbrella. She is also an investment committee member and liaises with the Yale Office of Investments. She is a trustee and investment committee member of the William Casper Graustein Memorial Fund, a large family foundation in Connecticut, whose vision is to achieve equity in education by working with those affected and inspiring all to end racism and poverty. And is also a trustee advisor of the New Majority Capital, a fund closing the racial and gender wealth gap via small business ownership. In addition to Graustein, Anna serves on the boards of Capital for Change, the largest Connecticut-based community development financial institution, as well as the National Angelman Syndrome Foundation, a rare disease close to her family's heart. Anna has her BA and her MBA from Yale University. And so please welcome our two panelists to the stage. There was a lot in those introductions, but I think it's good to have the context because you all will have a chance to ask questions when I'm done with mine. And so helpful to know about everything that you all have done. But thank you both so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
Yeah. And so to begin, I think it would be great to hear a little bit about your road to SOM and what business and society meant to you during your time here.
The Road to SOM. Yes, it sounds like a new mini-series. Well, let's not bury the headline. I don't have an MBA.
Scandalous. Those are classics.
I have an MPPM. All right. And that's, for those who are not in the know, it's Master's in Public and Private Management. And it was bestowed by the Yale School of Organization and Management. That's the old school. I came here really because of that mix of the public-private. I was a journalism major at Boston University, and I had this idea. I wanted to go into management. I wanted to do something with business. So I went to the journalism chair, and I said, you know, Professor Brand, I'd like to come here and maybe go to the School of Management. And I figured, you know, I could probably, you know, kind of exempt out of a few courses, and then I could get my master's degree here. And he said, well, no, we don't want you. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm a good student. He said, because you know people here. He said, you should go somewhere like this. And he threw Yale's application at me. And I looked at it and I said, wow, this is different. And when I thought about it, I realized, I don't know, maybe I don't really want an MBA. I want a degree that would give me management training, but also the sensitivity to work in an industry that's so highly regulated by public institutions. And that's really why I looked at this as a school. And I really have always thought that what Dean Charles is doing now with business and society is really bringing us back to what the foundation of the school was. And it's almost as though there's an arc, because we do need companies now to really have a social and a societal view on what they're doing. And that's exactly what I think Bill Donaldson and those were looking at way back when, 45 years. to try to make sure that we could train managers that actually really did have sensitivities on both worlds. So that's how I got here.
Wonderful. That's great. So I actually do have an MBA.
Clap for you.
I'm class of 2009. I see some folks sitting there. And but we were in the small building that was the one building. So this is actually very, very new and different. My road to MBA, I actually went to Yale for undergrad, and really kind of had this, as we all do when we're 18, right, want to change the world. And so I thought I would do that through the legal fields. I was going to go to Yale, go to law school, become a Supreme Court justice. That was like how my life was going to transpire. And I ended up actually out of college working at a policy think tank. And I was just very much like this liberal arts kind of person who really hadn't taken that many math classes, and immediately saw myself in front of tax and budget spreadsheets and all of these data and things like that, and began to quickly realize that the flow of capital and decision making, particularly in the state and tax and budget, the state budget process, really impacted all these communities and issues I cared about. It impacted the school systems, it impacted the wealth gap, it impacted healthcare, and all these things like that. And so I began to kind of think about, okay, knowing funds and how fund flows and decision making is really important. I then found myself running a statewide program at the young age of, I think I was maybe 24 or so. And I had this huge management, job, had no management experience whatsoever. And so I was kind of sitting there kind of like the on-the-job training of thinking about, okay, what do I do? And I was in a leadership program actually in New Haven. And a mentor of mine, who I think is still here, Heidi Brooks, who's a professor here. Okay. Oh. She said, Anna, you should think about business school. And I said, what? I'm like, I'm not that person. I'm not a Wall Street person. So, you should really think about business school. And she said, you should go to SOM and stay there for a day. And so I kind of reluctantly came to SOM and went into some classes and completely fell in love. I think it was a macro econ class. And I'm revealing my nerdy self now, right? But macroeconomics, and just seeing this way that thinking about economics and behavior and all that, it felt like it brought all these things to that mind, all these passions I had. I began to see that, okay, really understanding the capital markets, that's where I can really make the change I want to make. And so so that's kind of what I really focused on, was economic development and finance, and really learning about kind of this rocky world of Wall Street that I did not know anything about before coming to SOM.
Amazing.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you both. I think as a current first year, when you're an MBA student, it can sort of feel like you need to have your whole career path figured out, which is really stressful. And I think you both have had such successful careers where you really have worked at the intersection of business and society. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got there, and it wasn't necessarily a linear path. Was there a vision or a North Star or something that was driving you on your career path that got you to where you are today?
Okay. Want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So it's funny because when you said North Star, it jogged something in my mind. I'm first generation of both my parents from Barbados, of which when I was a small child, nobody knew where that was. And then came Rihanna. And I said, thank you, Rihanna.
That's true. Everyone knows now.
Everybody knows.
We all know where Barbados is.
We all know Barbados. And, immigrant parents, West Indian parents, go to school, get what you want, don't take no for an answer. And I had an aunt who is really the one that I credit for giving me kind of an international outlook, who would always say, hitch your wagon to a star. And that was always the thing that I took. So I'm actually going to make a reveal tonight that I've actually never told anybody.
Oh.
But
This is why he's the show business guy.
It's show business. So you guys, you heard the story about Jim Brand, who threw the application at me and I applied. So I have two letters here. I have one letter from John Miller that says, I'm pleased to confirm Dean Donaldson's announcement that you have been selected for admission to the MBA program. But I have another letter here that says, I'm sorry to report that the admissions committee is unable to offer you admissions. So I applied for the first year at SOM per the journalism professor who told me, and I didn't get in. So I like to think that, and I keep stuff like this because this is my reminder that there's no shame in just in not making it on your first try. There's no shame. You just have to keep focused. So ultimately what I did do is I called John and I said, gee, what do I need to do in order to make myself better? And I took some courses at Baruch and I reapplied to the school, and then I got that second letter. So I'd like to think that it's kind of the ancestors that...
That's fantastic. That's really, really cool.
Now, my classmates will know this when I say this, but I then rationalized it when I got here, and I said, oh, well, there's already a Matt Walton here, so that's why they didn't have me in here, because they didn't want two Waltons at the same time. No. But it was really... but we really... I guess I really always felt like they were always behind me, that there was something that was pushing. So I kind of kept that principle, I think, through all that I did, and tried to push through, even when there were adversities that kind of kept me back.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great story. I'm listening to Mark, and so I'm in the audience right now. So as you can tell, I'm Mark's sidekick. It's really amazing. But no, so I have no reveal. But my North Star, two things. So I grew up in Oklahoma. My family's all in Oklahoma. We have a family ranch in Oklahoma, and so I really had, been a farm girl, really, until coming to Yale for undergrad. And but I would say my North Star was a few things. One is family. And so my family actually, my great-great-grandparents acquired a lot of land in Arkansas. And then my great-grandparents were both born slaves. And they could not read, could not write. They only X their name. And so one time they discovered oil on the land in Arkansas. And my great-great-grandmother could not read the contract. And so my great-grandfather, who could read, he was not there. And he said, Mom, make sure you don't sign any documentation when I'm not there. But of course, she ended up signing something. And it actually kind of ended up, leasing the rights to the land for pennies on the dollar of what it should be. And so, but it was still enough money that they then bought another ranch in Oklahoma. And so I think about that a lot, this idea that my great-great-grandmother, who was born in the 1800s, who could not read, but yet she acquired several hundred acres of land and managed it successfully. That's still in our family to this day.
Wow.
And so this idea that, but I also think about the fact that she could not read, that also hindered her from probably getting more money than she could have got. And so I think that North Star, my family, and kind of what they've accomplished and done with so little compared to me, has really been a driving force in my life. But I would say that more recently, when it comes to kind of my career, it's really been around, I think I've always been searching for what's the lever of change I can use, handle, push, whatever, to really kind of make communities how I want them to be. And so I looked through policy originally, went through nonprofit. Policy was great, but it was very slow for me, and I didn't really want to spend, 40, 50 years on one bill or something. And so I think looking at, capital and investing and impact investing has really been a way for me to actually really bring capital to communities I care about and make change, looking at funding entrepreneurs like my great-grandmother, for example, and the people that could actually have, I think America, we always say, it's not it's very equal in hopes and dreams and things like that, but access to opportunity, it's not. And so this idea that by coming to SOM and having this, I can actually think about a way of impacting the capital markets in such a way that you can fund these amazing, talented immigrant entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs and BIPOC entrepreneurs. And so that's kind of been my guiding light, is how can I make communities vibrant and good for the people that live there.
Yeah.
Nice.
Amazing. Yeah, it's so great hearing both of your stories and how you've both pursued sort of this North Star and having an impact on society throughout your careers. So Mark, I want to hear a little bit more about your career path. We talked about how you started out at CBS and then moved on to found a TV syndication company, an independent film distributor, and then also helped to launch the Africa channel. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about what it was like making that move from a more established corporation to sort of these entrepreneurial ventures.
Sure. How much time do we have now? So I have to tell this story because, again, some of my classmates are here, that I didn't always really want to go into CBS to, kind of do the corporate routine. I actually came here because I thought that I would get this business training, and that there was a professor here that we all knew and loved, Larry Isaacson, who worked with me to write a business plan so I could buy radio stations. So I came with the intention of getting this business training and then becoming an entrepreneur. And one of my classmates and I were sitting in the cafeteria that probably doesn't exist now, and just having a conversation, and I'll truncate the conversation. She asked me 3 questions over the course of it. She said, well, Mark, do you have people that you know in the business? Do you have a network? And I said, well, no, but I'm a pretty affable guy, the personality. I'm sure I'll meet some people. And I said, okay. And then she said, well, do you have professional experience? I said, well, no, I've done college radio, and I'm sure I'll be able to get in there and get some things done. And then she said, well, do you have any money? And I said, well, no, but President Carter had this money for minority businesses, and I have this business plan. And she left. She said, Mark, well, I've always enjoyed you in class, and it's been great. Good luck. She changed my life. Because I said, I don't know anything, I don't have any network, and I don't have any money. So I need to do something, and that's actually what drove me corporately. And I was fortunate the president of CBS was looking for somebody who didn't want to crunch numbers, but wanted to get a view of the network. And he allowed me to spend an entire year in every department of network television, understanding how it worked. For those who remember Walter Cronkite, I sat with him as they did the news. I sat with John Newcomb as he called tennis. I was with the engineers. I went to Hollywood and listened to pitches. And at the end of it, his name is Jim Rosenfield, and we're actually still friends to this day. He's 95 years old. We go to lunch just about every year. I've tried to maintain that network. At the end of it, I kind of knew how to run a network. So I worked corporately. And I say the second person who kind of changed my trajectory was somebody in HR, who I said that I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but now I'm in this corporate, so when I get to the top, then my life will be complete. And she said, no. She said, when you get to the top, CBS's life will be complete, but not yours. So you need to do things that will arm you on your way there. And that's when I started part-time teaching. And that's when I started actually working with kids, and I started to then do things that, there was an affinity group of young black professionals. So I said, I can practice my management and my leadership skills here in a way that I can't do in front of my HP every day that I was crunching numbers. And that was something that I kind of pieced together. I'm going to be quicker. I always still wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I realized that spending the decade or so that I did at CBS was worthwhile, because when I did leave, I did have some of those components, but I was still rogue. I just still didn't, the day that the president of the sales department said, gee, Mark, you're thinking too much, because I was taking the marketing economic modeling that I learned when I was in the finance area and trying to apply that to how we could project revenue and he said, no, just bring me 1% more than last year. So I realized this is the energy that I needed to bring to my own business. So I won't even go into all of the areas that I did, but the reality is that it was that corporate training, but still not losing, I think, the spirit of wanting to be an entrepreneur and to make something happen. And the thread through the things that you read, starting a distribution company, distributing New York Undercover and Hispanic Heritage Awards, and then starting a film company, and then working with the folks who launched the Africa Channel. The thread was to help bring voices that were underserved, that would have been muted, but to find a mechanism to do that and use the training. So I knew how to build a network, so why not do that in a syndication arena where I kind of built my own network? When we distributed film, it was almost the same thing. Find distribution, take a good product, find distribution, monetize it. And it's when I teach, I put an African Ghanaian stool with 3 legs. And I said, that's my industry. You can sit on the 3 legs, but you can't sit on 2. And if you don't have the content that's good, the distribution that's there, and the monetization, it doesn't work. And I think that's been kind of the guiding principle. But I will say something about the Africa Channel just very quickly, because that was probably the culmination of what brought my SOM experience together with my business experience. The CEO who I met in Cannes, I'm going to Cannes in 2 weeks, but don't be jealous. For the film festival. I met him from Zimbabwe. He says, we in kind of similar businesses. I said, if you're ever in New York, look me up. He comes to New York. He says, I'm going to start a channel to demystify and change the perception of Africa around the world. And I said, I'm in. That's an impossible thing for me to turn down. But I realized that he had me in mind to be the revenue generator. Find a way that we could, come up with the KPIs and figure out how we sell this network. The president of the network then came to me and said sheepishly, he said, you're in New York and we're in Los Angeles building this network. But, we need to have relationships with the UN and these African diplomats because somehow we have to have connections with Africa. He said, would you mind being the guy that was the liaison with all of those? And Ambassador Andrew Young was our spokesman and first investor. And would you mind being the one that kind of talked to these public sector people? And I just said, yes, I'm your guy. And it was probably really the pinnacle of me being able to bring all of those things together, to be able to have the acumen to speak with those folks in that world, diplomacy and public sector, but then come up with a business model that allowed us to generate revenue and kind of run a network. So I'll stop there.
Really public and private management. That's amazing. And a question for you also about your career, Anna. So since getting your MBA at SOM, you've worked in endowments, and now you're working on economic development here in New Haven, as we heard. And I think impact investing is becoming much more popular as a career path for MBAs, but also as an investment strategy for all kinds of investors. So I'm curious from your perspective to hear how you would describe the evolution of this space and also where you think it's going in the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure. Great question. I think I've been in the impact investing or maybe the endowment management space for pretty much since business school. So I would say, going on, 15 years since I had my 15 years reunion. But, when I came into the space, it was definitely kind of, I think that, really one of kind of like an early part of the space where, impact investing started as more just of kind of the negative screens, right? That like don't do tobacco and guns and things like that. And so, and then of course now it's really moved into what really is truly impact investing, not actually detracting from bad, but what do you actually add positive to the community and things like that you're investing in. And so, I know and I've done this from a variety of ways. So say with a foundation like the Annie Casey Foundation or even Choate, you're kind of investing where you as a LP, you're investing in funds. And so I think what's been really exciting to me is looking at kind of the evolution of the fund management space, particularly I think looking at who's in the space right now. And so that's been a very interesting part of impact investing. Out of the trillions of dollars that are managed in the world, every 98.2% are managed by white males. I love white males. But the fact that only 1.8% is managed by everybody else is kind of it's a catastrophe, right? The fact that so basically 1.8% of the trillions of asset management are managed by that includes women, that includes all your people of color and things like that. And the data actually shows that the funds that are managed by diverse groups actually perform better than funds that are not, right? That's hedge funds, that's equities, that's venture capital. And so it's been really interesting, I think, to look at just the evolution of how like the actual bottom line of the investments are but also to look at kind of who's making investments and who's making those decisions. And so that's been a really fun part of my career. I sit on several investment committees now. And so being able to find more emerging fund managers, more emerging managers, people that also are managers, with private capital, which is very much a Silicon Valley, Boston, New York thing, being able to think about how private capital and entrepreneurship, how you can invest in New England, Connecticut, for example, or Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so really looking at kind of those overlooked geographies as well. And I think it's for the good, but it's also, so it's all the good things and social benefits for that. But it's also, you make better money, right? The fact that you can actually find better valuation than Oklahoma than you can in New York City or the Bay helps you out as an investor. And so I think that to me, the evolution of impact investing has really been this evolution of it not just being the do-gooder, good to do kind of thing, but really this idea that all good investing is impact investing. All good companies, a good company that will last for the next 100 years will treat employees right, will look at non-extractive ways of how they get materials, supply chain, and things like that. So that's been really neat to kind of see the mainstream coming in of impact investing. What's been really fascinating for me, like I said, as kind of being, as first sitting in the more, I'd say, looking at investing in funds and being on the LP side, and now what I'm doing is very different. I'm used to kind of, I lived in Connecticut, but I was always flitting and fluttering somewhere to Singapore or whatever, West Coast, whatever like that, and you really didn't actually kind of root in Connecticut. And but now actually I'm kind of doing, I think probably the passion, or at least a passion part of my career, where I'm actually doing a direct kind of project development work in Connecticut, in a place where my children were born, I have a house, my husband lives here, all that. It's been really neat. And so the work I'm doing now at Concorp, which is a Black-run organization that's doing a lot of actually place-based impact investing in Connecticut. I don't know if you're all familiar with like the Apple Store, like kind of the Yale bookstore area, part of Broadway. But if you go a few blocks west, I think, that's called the Dixwell New Hallville neighborhood. That is a historic African-American neighborhood. And it's, kind of very much like in the 50s and 60s, used to be kind of like a main street and really hub of entrepreneurship and development and middle class prosperity. But then I think after a lot of the factories kind of closed down in New Haven, it became really, dilapidated. And so it's a community that's been really underinvested for decades now. And so we actually acquired this strip mall that was like an old kind of, strip mall, and we acquired that 8-acre parcel of land. And it took us a couple years to acquire that. They were all individually owned, and the wonders of city politics and things like that. But we acquired that land, and we actually developed now this mixed-use development project that's really looking at how do you bring a lot of community needs, such as daycare and grocery and things like that, to a community that really, really needs it, but knowing that those things really don't cash flow, and so, daycare is great, but it doesn't cash flow, and so is different, a grocery store, for example, but it's really needed. And so we're looking at this project as kind of ways of having cash flowing assets, such as market rate real estate and things like that, really kind of keep the project generative so that you can also supply the community with those other needs that are very needed. And so that's been, I think, really neat for me, because it's very easy to make investment decisions from like a computer, which I'm used to doing and I like doing, but kind of like in a community where you see people at the grocery store every day and they see you, and you're at a city hall town meeting and they can throw an egg at you or something. Right. Not literal, no, figurative, not literal. But it's been very different. So I think it's been really a learning for me of actually, kind of this idea of state and society. I think about it as very macro, right? It's like the presidents and the this and this, but also the society, the people in society that often are excluded from decisions. And so this current project has been really neat about thinking about a lot of community engagement and how do you really engage the community? How do you really engage that part of society and some of the grand things that we're doing? And so, we also do a lot of entrepreneurship funding, and so it's kind of been it's been a joy to actually bring some of this kind of world-class training and things like that, but to New Haven, to Connecticut, a place that I really adore.
Yes.
Thanks, Anna. We're going to have to make our way there when it's all
absolutely
running. I'm going to ask one more question, and then hand it over to the audience. So you both have maintained your relationship with Yale University since you graduated, serving on various boards, Mark, your participation in CARE. And I'd just love to hear a little bit about what has motivated you to remain involved with the university.
No. And I had to pause because for me, it's 45 years. Mm-hmm. So I had to think about it. I was very moved by my experience here. Met some really great people. And I think that what I've always been looking for is this school the same on this end? And I always, at each interview, said, yeah, it's the same type of student, open-minded, thinking about the world in a different place, in a different way. And that's been a motivator. That's what's been something that's keeping me going. I have had a lot of different incarnations. You know, the CDO asked me to come for a while to actually talk to media and entertainment students at one point. I actually, Dean Podolny, actually after we had our trip to Tanzania and South Africa that we organized, he asked me to be on the board, so I was on the board of advisors for a while. But I think the thing that's probably made most impact for me has been CARE. Because it feels like it's a culmination of what I had in my mind, which is that the school did have a challenge in trying to be as diverse and as equitable as it should be as a top flight business school. Oh, I said business school, not management school. Must be changing. Right. And when Dean Charles asked whether or not I would join the committee, I just said, yeah, this looks like a really impactful way to have some faculty and some students and some alums and staff and to all get together and actually think about what could make this place better, what could make this place embrace diversity in the way that it needs to be embraced, not just as a window dress, but as really getting to systemic structural issues. And I really just, I need to take a pause to just say a big thank you to Kristen Byers. Kristen was my co-chair, but Kristen, who was running the OID area, which was really the backbone for implementing a lot of what CARE did, who's now moved on to another responsibility. But I really wanted to make sure that, that she was given some credit as we now have a new person in that role, Ebony, who's joined. But Kristen, along with a number of others that I won't name all of them here, we don't have that much time. But I think we're on to something. Mm-hmm. We're on to being able to have each individual area do what they do to incorporate initiatives that will make this a more diverse and inclusive environment, but then to have CARE as institutionalizing things like this colloquium for Don H. Ogilvie, like the vodcast that Enoch Reyes is so diligently keeping going, that these are the types of initiatives that will be here and that somebody 50 years from now will look back and say, this is what that school on the Hill did that was different. This is why this is such a special place. So every so often I get mad at the school because, yes, I did get the letter that said, if you give me 2 box tops and $25, I'll send you an MBA. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And I'm sorry, Jeff Garten, if I've offended you in any way. But every so often I would have had those things that say, the school is just not what I want it to be. And then I'll meet somebody like I did on the Amtrak who's wearing an SOM shirt, and we talk, and by the end of the trip, he said, I'd love to follow up on that thing that we were talking about. And then I'd link in with somebody and I'd say, I'm trying to reach somebody at Airbnb who's in such and such. I'm an SOM grad. And then they would say, here's the contact. And I say, that's my school. Yeah. That's what I've invested in. And that's why I'll keep investing in it as long as I can. And even when I'm in the nursing home, which they let me out of today to come here to know. Anna?
Very, very similar.
She's nowhere near the nursing home.
I don't know. Ask my child. He says, you were born in the 1900s? I yeah, they actually had school in the 1900s. So, but I would say that. So my involvement with Yale University has really been, I was counting now, 25 years from my undergrad to business school. And so I came here in 1999. And so I'm very involved in Yale at large. I definitely bleed blue, as they say. So I'm kind of like trying to slowly, brainwash my child to like know that he's coming to Yale, because that's where we go to school. But I've been, some things that have been very interesting to me about involvement with Yale is that I would say across the university. I'm on the board of Dwight Hall, which is the public service umbrella of Yale University, and so that's been really neat to kind of get more back involved with some of the undergrad life and seeing what Yale is doing as a whole, and particularly now, it's such a really rich time of discourse and things like that. So I'm on the board of Dwight Hall and on the investment committee, and that's been great. One of the things I probably most enjoy is that I do a lot of interviewing for students entering to undergrad or business school, and so that's been really fun, and particularly around looking at New Haven area students who are applying to Yale and being able to interview them is great. I think a lot of people that geographically live close to Yale oftentimes don't think about Yale as a choice. And so I'm kind of this ambassador about going to Yale and all that. So that's been really fun. I would say that one of the most really interesting things I've done lately, I was on my undergrad, we had our 20th year reunion last year, and I was on the gift committee for that. And as you know, as your reunion years tick up, the expectation of your checks tick up as well. And so we've had to give a pretty, decent sized gift for our 20th year. And it was so wonderful talking to other classmates and re-engaging with them. But also, my daughter has two rare brain diseases. And it was when I was thinking about my own personal gift to Yale, I learned a lot about the work that was being done, some neuroimmunology work that was being done. There's a new neuroscience facility they're building. And I didn't even know that really about there's some Angelman syndrome work with my disease my daughter has. So I actually gave my gift for neuroimmunology. And that was, really special to be able to connect this school that I love and this research that I love and this child that I love, and all of these things kind of coming to bear. And so I think that's to me, that's the Yale way, the idea that everything is so connected, right? You can be in business school and take a class at the forestry school or the law school or joint degree programs and all the other executive programs they have right now. And so I just think, if I think the world of Yale, I also think the world of Yale being in New Haven, and the fact that we're actually in a university, but also kind of being in a city. Me that came from Oklahoma, New Haven was like the very big city to me. And so I didn't really ever have people honking their cars at me or their horns at me before, things like that, or being on the cold East Coast. And so it was really kind of like learning business and things like that, but also kind of learning it almost like a really real world experience, being able to connect what I was learning in a textbook or in a class or things like that, but to a nonprofit or to a company here in Connecticut. And so that's been really neat to see. I've been really excited to see kind of how Yale SOM has been really leading a lot of the biotech investment that's been happening in New Haven with Yale Ventures and things like that. And so I'm very, very proud alum, and just love kind of seeing how New Haven has become this hub of technology and innovation and entrepreneurship and venture capital that it was not, I say, 25 years ago.
Wow. Totally. That's great. Thank you both so much.
Cool.
And I want to make sure we move to the audience.
Yeah.
I think we have some mic runners, and so if you raise your hands, they will find you.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Yuli.
You're looking beautiful as always.
Thank you, Yuli.
That stat that you offered up, 98.2%, that's white males controlling the investment. That struck me because the research about diverse teams making better decisions is not new.
Right.
We were talking about that. I know McKinsey did it.
Exactly.
It's an investment thesis for a lot of folks. So at the beginning of that research, they talked about how, look, people are not going to be diverse simply because it's a good thing to do or because they like doing it. We got to come with numbers. So now we have the numbers, and we've had them for about a decade. Mm-hmm. What do you think is still stopping this group of people that is making investment decisions? What's preventing them from diversifying their teams?
Thank you, Yuli. I'm going to laugh first. I'm going to actually answer the question very seriously, but I'm laughing because I was going to say when you asked a question about your SOM experience, Yuli and I I think we were buddies and going to every career panel or whatever that happened at SOM, and we would always say we're going to ask the first question. that was like our 2-year motto. So as soon as Yuli got up, I was like, yeah. So we would always, the Goldman Sachs did this. So we would always be sitting on the front row, and we would ask the first question. So I'm glad to see that my dear friend is true to form.
All right. That's great.
But now the serious topic of that, no, that's really appreciative. The serious, it's this idea that the data is really clear on diverse teams performing better. There's a lot of work out of Yale, a lot of work out of Harvard. That and there's a lot of work that shows that, particularly when it comes to selection of investments in companies, that if you look at, let's say, a diverse team versus a non-diverse team, that their first thought process of like a company doing well is pretty people kind of pick the stars, right? But it's this idea of like the reason why diverse fund managers perform better is like when the company is not doing well, the diverse teams have better ways of approaching how to kind of work out and fix and think about different issues that kind of can take that company through the various stages of their evolution. And so they can kind of get a better multiple from it. And so but this idea but I think, when it comes to making decisions, all of us have these implicit biases, right? And so I think oftentimes we make decisions for people that make us seem comfortable, And so if an investment committee is all people who are 80, for example, they will probably likely pick people who that's a great company, that, nursing home, but whatever that is and things like that. Not pointing to him about nursing. That was so horrible. I did not mean that. Right? He's a spry 25.
I was the youngest in my class. I just want to make sure.
Exactly, right.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. But one example, this investment, and so like I said, I have this is I'll make sure I shut up. I'm getting very excited about this question, but, there is this. I recently was looking at a company where it was run by Nigerian immigrant women, and they were having a company that was, I think, about like a wig company, right? And they had gone to about maybe 100 people and got no, because they said you're not sizing the market right. This is really not who's wearing wigs, right? Now, if you're a black woman, you know that the wig market and the wig market, the extension market, is a very big market. And so when they went to a more diverse fund, that fund said yes, they were able to size that market accurately, right? And so I think this idea that, having teams that have different experiences, whether it's regional, gender, age, all these type of things, ethnicity, immigrant, it just makes the product better, makes the selection better, and the data's really there. But I think, to me, the reason that we don't do that is because of the implicit bias. It's because it's really sad that in a world of money, where you think the goal should be to make more money, that people will actually leave money on the table to invest in funds that are doing more poor because of just enhancing bias. So it really kind of makes no sense. And I think until we actually have more people making decisions, more diversity in the room of the table making decisions, you won't see it change. So I think, to me, as investment committees get more diverse, as firms and funds get more diverse, you'll see that. So like I said, I'm on a foundation board that maybe about 5 years ago, our portfolio was very typical, really plain vanilla portfolio of who was kind of in it. Whereas now we have about 70% of our portfolio is aligned with BIPOC and women managers, and it's kicking ass. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Amy. I'm part of the Reunion 23 class, so awesome to see classmates here. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed you talking about the mixed-use building that you acquired. I recently joined as emerging leaders board member for the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless, and I've been learning a little bit about the unsheltered populations that are living on the streets in Boston. And I know visiting Atlanta and other cities, it's seeing unsheltered populations is a real problem just on sidewalks and under bridges. So I've been really interested in learning more about the real estate market from the perspective of people who are unsheltered or marginalized from it, but there doesn't seem to be like an active industry going in real estate that's making investments to support this population's survival. I was curious if you have seen that in your work in terms of like the real estate specifically around this population, or how you would recommend learning about it or even building some career steps to become leading in that space. So thank you.
Yeah, that's actually a really fantastic question, and I'll say my answer, but also follow up more with you later. But I think that it's like talking about the evolution of impact investing, and so I think there's been right now there are actually some really interesting, even in Boston. Think about Boston Ujima, who is a neighborhood-based community collective fund. Where they're actually, I think they're based in Roxbury, Dorchester, but they're like a community fund that if basically you can be in the fund if you have residency in that geography. And it's a way, and they're actually looking at some of those issues, particularly everything around children, like, unhoused children and things, but looking at kind of like tackling some of those really nitty-gritty, those issues. I will say that, with impact investing, it's, things like carbon footprint is very easy to measure. Things like how do you help unhoused is much harder, right? And so sometimes you don't really have as many funds doing that, but there are more funds that are really, I think, addressing those issues. And so I think there's like Trident, for example, was doing some things in a bit more southern U.S. around that. And so there's definitely a lot of funds that do. There's the one fund I know called like SIA that's actually based in Boston that is like looking at a lot of health equity, but they also have some work around like housing and things like that too. So there are funds that are doing that, and I think there are career paths for that. I would say that you would be in a perfect sweet spot as someone that actually has to care about this issue, but wants to address it from, I'll say, more of a financially viable side. I think that's, to me, like what's missing in a lot of kind of social problems. And so you would be, I think you can make that career and, do that. You might also want to think about, do you want to be involved in a CDFI? CDFIs are not really like venture funds, but they stand for community development financial institutions. And so Boston, for example, has, it used to be called it's called Blue Hub now. It used to be called Boston Community Capital. But, these CDFIs really look at sometimes getting money into communities, like, they do it a lot through lending, and some of them have other funds. But there's a lot of CDFIs across the country. So Blue Hub, LISC, and there's a lot of other ones that do kind of tackle some of those issues.
I was at the encampment last weekend, and there were several signs that said "Occupy Yale." Several signs that Yale is very rich. Make Yale invest in New Haven. I listened. I didn't really know what to say. What's your reaction to that? How should some of us approach this issue from your perspectives? Mm-hmm. And I'm an MPPM from '81.
You should take that. You're a media work. Yeah.
It's a challenge to come up with a clear answer because, and I'm in academia now, so I'm teaching at the new school, and today our students were arrested, along with Columbia students, and some others from New York. So the outgrowth, the aftermath of what is happening is going to have ripple effects, I think, for a while. But I can't really speak specifically to New Haven so much. I've been so far away from New Haven that it's a while. But I will say that the responsibility, not to make light of it, but what Spider-Man's Uncle Ben used to say is that with great power comes great responsibility. I think that this is what's in that same realm, that when you have a university that does have influence, that does have money, that does have power, that they need to have a sense of how they can impact the communities positively that they exist in. You know, I'm from New York, lived in Harlem before moving, you know, out, and you realize how much real estate Columbia University owns in Harlem,
Yeah.
which for years was desolate until now, kind of changing the look by adding buildings and so on. But adding buildings is not necessarily the thing. It's where I look to people like Anna who are able to take whatever monies and now turn them into things that actually do help the communities of which they're in. So I feel there's a responsibility that universities have, but when it comes down to exactly what the mechanics of that are, that's the difficult question. And I've never been a politician. No, I don't know.
All I would say is I think it definitely is really complicated. You know, I think that when it comes to especially when it comes to endowments and foundations, given that if they're investing, you know, like a direct investment, let's say me investing in Mark's business, for example, I can wind that down very fast. When I'm in a 7 to 10 year lockup, which is what you really are in when you're in a fund, it's a, you know, so that's probably what that's what they're thinking through. How do you actually, you know, it's like it's easier said than done to unwind from a 10-year lockup fund. So I'm sure that's what the Yale, you know, but I will say that that one thing I think about is, you know, through history, like so I'm 43 right now, and like I said, my son reminds me how old I am every day, right? And this idea that I think it's really interesting looking at, you know, kind of the apartheid in South Africa, right? How the shareholder advocacy and divestment movement, you know, really